The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with agonizing slowness, each second a hammer blow against the silence of the small cabin. 5-year-old Liam Thompson lay wide awake in his bed, the familiar creaks and groans of the house amplified into monstrous sounds by the growing storm outside. He clutched his tattered teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, tighter to his chest. But it wasn't the thunder that had jolted him awake, it was a sound he couldn't quite place, a muted thud, followed by the stifled murmur of voices. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind howling through the ancient pines surrounding their home. Martha Thompson, his grandmother, had always been his anchor, his protector. Since the accident, the one that had stolen his parents and left him with fragmented memories and a constant, gnawing emptiness, she had been everything. Her presence was usually a warm, comforting weight in the small cabin, a silent promise of safety. But tonight, that familiar sense of security was absent, replaced by a cold dread that settled deep in his bones. Liam slipped out of bed, his bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The cabin was plunged in near darkness, the only light filtering through the gaps in the curtains from the flickering lightning. He crept towards the living room, his heart hammering against his ribs. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the silence, followed by a sickening thud. Liam froze, his breath catching in his throat. He peeked around the corner, his eyes widening in terror. 3 figures, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks, stood over his grandmother, who lay motionless on the floor, a dark stain spreading across the worn rug beneath her head. "Where is it?" one of the masked men snarled, his voice rough and menacing. "The old woman knows where it is." Another man, the largest of the 3, spotted Liam. Well, he sneered. "Looks like we have a little guest. Come here, boy." Liam instinctively backed away, cornered against the wall. Fear paralyzed him, stealing his voice. The large man reached for him, his gloved hand outstretched. Liam squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Just as the man's fingers brushed his arm, a guttural growl ripped through the air. It wasn't the sound of any animal he had ever heard before. The masked men froze, their heads snapping towards the doorway. 4 massive shapes materialized from the shadows, their eyes gleaming like embers in the dim light. They were wolves, huge, powerful, and utterly terrifying. The lead wolf, a magnificent male with a scarred snout and silver-streaked fur, stepped forward, his lip curled back, revealing a row of sharp, menacing teeth. A deep, primal rage radiated from him, silencing the storm outside. The masked men hesitated, their bravado faltering. The large man lowered his hand, his voice trembling. What are those things?" Before anyone could react, the silver-backed wolf lunged. The cabin erupted in chaos, the terrified screams of the masked men, the snapping jaws of the wolves, the shattering of glass and splintering of wood. Liam huddled against the wall, his eyes wide with terror, but also with a strange sense of awe. The wolves were protecting him. As the dust settled, Liam found himself unharmed, nestled between the warm fur of the wolves. He felt the lead wolf lick his hand, a rough, almost comforting gesture. In that moment, something shifted within him. The fear began to recede, replaced by a strange sense of connection, a feeling that he was not alone. Lying nearby on the floor was his lapped, an old compass he always carried. It belonged to his father, and the needle spinned uncontrollably, as though searching for a direction it could no longer find. Pinewood Valley was a town steeped in tradition, its history etched in the weathered faces of its inhabitants and the gnarled branches of the ancient pines that surrounded it. but the tradition that defined Pinewood Valley above all others was the hunt, the relentless pursuit of the wolf. The town square boasted a bronze statue of Jedediah Pinewood, the town's founder, rifle in hand, his boot planted triumphantly on the carcass of a wolf. Every November, the town celebrated the Hunters' Festival, a week-long celebration of their victory over the wild. Stories of the beast menace were passed down through generations, fueling the annual wolf hunt. For the people of Pinewood Valley, wolves weren't just animals, they were symbols of the wilderness, the untamed force that their ancestors had fought to conquer. Every child grew up hearing tales of cunning wolves preying on livestock, pets, and even children who strayed too far into the woods. The taxidermy shop on Main Street displayed dozens of preserved wolf heads, their glass eyes forever frozen in a predatory stare. Liam Thompson had always been an outsider in this close-knit community. Orphaned at a young age, he lived with his grandmother, Martha, a woman respected but also viewed with a degree of suspicion due to her quiet nature and her grandson's oddities. Unlike the other children, Liam preferred the company of the forest to the playground. He often wandered alone into the woods, his gaze fixed on the trees, as if listening to voices only he could hear. The other children whispered, calling him Wolf Boy, a label that both frightened and intrigued him. "Leave him be, you lot," a voice boomed one day on the playground. Thomas Parker, the elementary school teacher, intervened, his face flushed. He had come from the east and always sought to protect Liam from the other children, even though Liam was often quiet and reserved. Martha defended Liam fiercely, but she worried about his future. She knew that Pinewood Valley valued conformity above all else, and Liam was anything but ordinary. He seemed drawn to the wild, his heart beating to a rhythm that the town couldn't understand. Sheriff Jack Wilson maintained an uneasy peace between the various factions of the town. A third-generation resident, he knew everyone's secrets and the intricate web of relationships that held Pinewood Valley together. But even he struggled to reconcile the town's deep-seated hatred of wolves with the recent reports of Liam being saved by them. And then there was Robert Miller, a man consumed by grief and fueled by hatred. 12 years ago, a wolf pack had killed his teenage son. Since then, he had dedicated his life to eradicating the wolf population, his influence over the town council ensuring that wolf protection laws were fiercely opposed. To Robert Miller, wolves were not just a threat, they were a personal vendetta. Liam, having overheard some of the adults' conversations at the town's general store, knew he needed to keep the wolves a secret. If Robert Miller or the other hunters discovered them, they would surely be killed. He touched the compass in his pocket, then stared at the woods, wondering if his father had known of this hatred, or if the man had seen things differently. The day that changed everything began like any other spring morning. Liam, unable to shake off the lingering fear from the masked men's intrusion, slipped away from the cabin before dawn, while Martha was still asleep. A half-eaten apple and a slice of bread were stuffed into his pocket, meant to last him the morning. The 6-year-old navigated the forest edge with a confidence that belied his age, his small boots barely disturbing the damp earth. He had a secret spot, a place where he felt truly at peace, a hidden grove nestled beside a waterfall. Here, the sunlight dappled through the leaves, creating an ethereal glow. He often sat for hours, listening to the murmur of the water and the rustle of the leaves, his patience rewarded with glimpses of woodland creatures that few villagers ever saw. His father had taken him to these woods, teaching him to respect the forest. But this morning, the forest felt different. The usual chorus of birdsong was absent, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hair on Liam's arms stand on end. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, as if something terrible was about to happen. Then he heard it, a sharp crack echoing through the trees, followed by several more in quick succession. Gunshots. Though hunting season was months away, Liam knew that some men from the village ignored such restrictions, especially when it came to wolves. He knew, somehow, that the masked men, or others like them, would come again, and he was suddenly aware of his own loneliness. As if drawn by an invisible thread, Liam moved deeper into the forest than he had ever ventured before. The morning mist parted around his small figure as he followed a barely visible game trail up the ridge. The shots had stopped, but now he could hear men's voices in the distance, laughing and congratulating each other. Liam froze behind a thick pine trunk as 3 hunters emerged into a clearing about 50 yards ahead. He recognized Robert Miller's distinctive limp as he bent down to examine something on the ground. "Got the mother," he announced, nudging the large gray form with his boot. "Biggest female I've seen in these parts." "Think there are cubs nearby?" asked another man, scanning the surrounding trees. "If there are, they won't last long without her," Robert replied, shouldering his rifle. "Nature takes care of its own problems. Let's head back before the sheriff starts asking questions." Liam waited, barely breathing, until the men's voices faded completely. Only then did he approach the clearing, his heart pounding in his small chest. The she-wolf lay on her side, her silver-gray coat stained dark red where the bullets had struck. Her ember eyes stared sightlessly at the morning sky. Liam had never seen a wolf up close before. Despite the village's teachings, he felt no fear, only a profound sadness and anger at the senseless killing. He touched the lappet in his pocket, his grip tightening around it. A soft whimpering sound drew his attention to a hollow beneath a nearby rock outcropping. Moving cautiously, Liam crouched down and peered into the darkness. 4 tiny forms huddled together in the back of the den, wolf cubs, their eyes barely open, their bodies trembling with cold and hunger. Without their mother, they would surely die within days, if not hours. Liam knew what the villagers would say: "Good riddance, one less wolf family to threaten livestock and children." His grandmother had warned him countless times about the dangers of wolves, repeating the village mantra that the only good wolf is a dead wolf. But as Liam looked at the helpless cubs, something fierce and protective awoke within him. These weren't the monsters from village stories, they were orphans, just like him. He remembered his father's love of the woods and the stories he told him. Before he could second-guess himself, Liam made a decision. Before the warmth escaped the cubs completely, Liam knew he had to act fast. He removed his jacket and laid it on the ground, the rough fabric offering a small comfort against the cold earth. One by one, he gently lifted each cub, careful not to startle them, and placed them on the makeshift bed. They were surprisingly heavy, their fur soft and warm against his hands. When all 4 were gathered, he tied the sleeves of his jacket together, creating a makeshift sling. "It's okay," he whispered to the squirming bundle. "I lost my mom and dad too. I won't let anything happen to you." The walk home took twice as long with his precious cargo. Twice he had to hide as villagers passed nearby on the forest paths, their voices carrying on the wind. He had to take a different path than he normally would, away from the waterfall where he had been with his father. By the time he reached the edge of his grandmother's property, the morning was half gone and he knew Martha would be worried sick. But there was no way he could bring the cubs into the house. His grandmother would immediately call Sheriff Wilson, and the orphans would be destroyed as dangerous predators. The cellar became their sanctuary. Built into the hillside behind the house, it was accessible through an external door that Martha rarely used due to her stiff knees. Liam cleared a space behind the shelves of preserved fruits and vegetables, creating a nest from old blankets he smuggled from the linen closet. He placed the whimpering cubs in their new home, his mind racing with plans and problems. They would need milk, but how could he get enough without arousing suspicion? And what about when they grew larger? How long could he keep such a secret in a village where everyone knew everyone else's business? For now, he focused on keeping them alive through the night. From the refrigerator, he stole half a bottle of milk and a raw chicken meant for tomorrow's dinner. After mashing the meat into tiny pieces and warming the milk, he returned to the cellar, his heart pounding with anticipation. The cubs initially refused his offerings, their tiny bodies trembling with fear and uncertainty. But hunger eventually won out. Liam watched in wonder as they lapped at the milk he dripped onto his fingers and tentatively accepted bits of meat from his palm. "I'll call you Shadow," he whispered to the largest cub, whose fur was darkest, a prominent scar already visible above his left eye, already a survivor like Liam. "And you, Luna," he told the female with a white patch on her chest. "You'll be Storm," he decided for the gray male who growled the most. "And you," he said to the smallest, a runt with curious eyes, "you're Scout." For the first time since his parents' death, Liam felt a sense of purpose stronger than his grief. As the spring sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Pinewood Valley, the little boy made a solemn promise to his 4 new companions. "We're a family now," he whispered, his voice filled with determination. "And family protects each other, no matter what." He didn't realize just how prophetic those words would prove to be in the years ahead, or how thoroughly his act of compassion would challenge everything his community believed about wolves, and about him. He closed his eyes, clutching the lapped, remembering his father and knowing he did the right thing. Summer arrived in Pinewood Valley, bringing with it longer days and new challenges for Liam Thompson. What had begun as 4 tiny, helpless wolf cubs had transformed into increasingly energetic young wolves with growing appetites and louder voices. The cellar, once a perfect hiding place, had become woefully inadequate. Liam could no longer satisfy their hunger with scraps from the kitchen or the occasional rabbit he managed to trap. Their playful wrestling matches threatened to knock over the shelves of preserves, and their growing vocalizations risked discovery whenever Martha ventured near the cellar door. On a particularly warm July morning, Liam made a decision. He rose before dawn and slipped out to the densest part of the forest that bordered their property. He had discovered an abandoned hunter's cabin 3 weeks earlier during one of his forest explorations, a dilapidated structure, forgotten by the village, half collapsed, but with one room still relatively intact. Over the next 4 days, he dedicated every spare moment to creating a sanctuary. He gathered fallen branches to reinforce the walls, stuffed moss and leaves into gaps to block the wind, and created a thick bedding of pine needles on the floor. A small stream ran nearby, solving the water problem. Moving the wolves proved to be the greatest challenge. Now the size of medium dogs, they couldn't all fit in his jacket anymore. Liam waited for a night when Martha took sleeping pills for her stiff joints. Then, under the cover of darkness, he led the wolves, one by one, from the cellar to their new forest home. Shadow went first, seeming to understand the need for silence as Liam whispered commands. Luna followed easily, her instincts guiding her through the familiar forest. Storm required constant coaxing, his playful nature threatening to expose them. Scout, always the most mischievous, nearly gave them away by chasing a startled rabbit across the yard. By midnight, all 4 wolves were installed in their new den, and Liam collapsed beside them, exhausted but triumphant. "I'll come every day," he promised, stroking their thickening fur. "No one will find you here." The arrangement worked surprisingly well. Liam divided his time between home chores, school preparation, and tending to his secret family. He taught the wolves to hunt small game, though they seemed to have natural instincts that required little guidance. He marveled at how quickly they grew, their puppy awkwardness giving way to the graceful movements of predators. Yet, around him, they remained playful and affectionate, greeting his arrivals with enthusiastic licks and gentle nudges. He had never told another soul of his woods, or the Lapt his father held. He kept it close to his heart, like a symbol of hope. Liam had no frame of reference to realize how extraordinary this was, that wild wolves would accept a human child as part of their pack. But as whispers turned to shouts around Pinewood Valley, he couldn't keep it a secret for long. The first wolf sightings came in early September, just as school resumed after summer break. Jim Peterson, who owned the general store, reported seeing a massive wolf near his property line at dusk. 2 days later, the Anderson family claimed they'd spotted 2 wolves watching their cattle from the forest edge. By the end of the week, the village buzzed with sightings and speculation. "Never seen wolves this bold," Robert Miller declared during an emergency town meeting at the community hall. "They're getting closer to our homes than ever before. Something's drawn them in." Sheriff Wilson attempted to calm the growing panic. "Let's not overreact. Wolves are territorial animals. Maybe a new pack has moved into the region, and they're exploring the boundaries." "My grandfather told me stories," interjected elderly Mrs. Winters, her voice quavering, "about children who could speak to wolves, who ran with them in the forest. Wolf children, he called them." Her rheumy eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Liam, sitting quietly beside his grandmother. Children who were different. A murmur rippled through the assembled villagers. Liam felt dozens of eyes turned toward him, burning with suspicion and fear. Martha grasped her grandson's hand tightly, her knuckles white. "That's superstitious nonsense," Thomas Parker said firmly, standing up from his seat. "Wolves are simply animals, acting according to their nature. They don't befriend humans, and humans certainly don't become wolves." But the seed had been planted. Over the following weeks, Liam noticed how mothers pulled their children closer when he passed by in the village, how conversations stopped when he entered the general store, how Robert Miller seemed to watch his house from his truck parked down the road. One day after school, a group of older boys followed him partway home, taunting him with howls and calling him Wolf Boy. When he ignored them, the largest boy, Robert Miller's nephew, threw a rock that struck his shoulder. Liam whirled around, his eyes flashing with a fierce anger that startled the boys into momentary silence. "Leave me alone," he said, his voice unusually steady for a 6-year-old. "Or you'll be sorry." The boys laughed, but there was nervousness behind their bravado. They dispersed, shouting more insults from a safer distance. Liam rubbed his bruised shoulder, fighting back tears. He couldn't tell them that their taunts were partially true. He was friends with wolves, but they weren't just any wolves, they were his wolves, his family, and he would protect them just as fiercely as they would protect him. That night, the small shed in the back of their property burned to the ground. In the ashes, a note was found. "The Lapt points to death." Martha Thompson had lived in Pinewood Valley for all of her 72 years. She knew its seasons, its people, and its secrets. From the day Liam had moved into her home, Martha had sensed something different about him, a wildness, yes, but also a profound capacity for love that had somehow survived the tragedy of his parents' deaths. Lately, though, Martha had begun to worry. Liam disappeared into the forest for hours, returning with twigs in his hair and an air of secrecy. Food disappeared from the pantry at an alarming rate. And then there were the rumors sweeping through the village, whispers of wolves and strange behavior. Martha had dismissed the gossip as small-town pettiness, until the October morning when she followed her grandson into the forest. Her stiff knees protested every step, but determination drove her forward, keeping a careful distance as Liam navigated the woodland path with surprising confidence. When the child disappeared into what appeared to be an abandoned structure, Martha crept closer, peering through a gap in the wall. What she saw stopped her heart. Liam sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by 4 half-grown wolves. One massive head rested in the child's lap as he stroked its ears. Another brought him something, a dead rabbit, which Liam accepted with praise, as if receiving a precious gift. The wolves moved around him with a careful gentleness that defied everything Martha had ever believed about these creatures. Martha must have made some small sound of shock, because suddenly all 5 heads turned toward her hiding place. The largest wolf, silver-backed and alert, moved protectively in front of Liam. "Grandma." Liam's voice trembled as he stood. "Don't be afraid. They won't hurt you. They're my friends." Martha stepped into the clearing, her legs barely supporting her. The wolves watched her with intelligent amber eyes, neither retreating nor advancing. "Liam Thompson," Martha's voice shook with emotion, "what have you done?" As Liam told his story, finding the orphaned cubs, raising them in secret, creating this hidden sanctuary, Martha's mind raced with conflicting emotions. Pride in her grandson's compassion battled with fear for his safety. The understanding of Liam's loneliness wedded with the knowledge of the village's hatred of wolves. And beneath it all lay a terrible secret that Martha had carried for years, the true contents of Liam's father's will and the reasons he kept it hidden. For it had been Martha, not Robert Miller, who had killed the mother wolf that spring day. She had been gathering herbs in the forest when the she-wolf appeared on the path ahead, teeth bared in protective rage. Martha had fired the ancient rifle she carried for protection, never knowing that the wolf had been defending her den and cubs, never imagining that her grandson would find the orphans and take them as his own. She remembered the lap her son always held, its needle pointing towards the sky. Now, looking at the silver wolf who watched her with such intelligence, Martha saw the unmistakable resemblance to the mother she had killed. The knowledge sat like a stone in her chest, heavy with the weight of consequences yet to come. The town was in an uproar. Thomas Parker had been quiet ever since the last note, and now, he would have to choose, his family and his friends, or the traditions he had long honored. News of Liam's wolves spread through Pinewood Valley like wildfire. By nightfall, nearly every resident had heard some version of the story, each telling more dramatic than the last. Some claimed the child had trained the wolves to hunt for him. Others insisted he could communicate with them through some mysterious language. The most outlandish rumors suggested he had been raised by wolves himself after surviving the car crash that killed his parents. The truth, that a compassionate little boy had rescued orphaned cubs and raised them with love, seemed almost mundane by comparison. The village council called an emergency meeting at the community hall. Every seat was filled, with dozens more residents standing along the walls. Sheriff Wilson struggled to maintain order as voices competed to be heard. "Those wolves need to be destroyed immediately," Robert Miller declared, his weathered face flushed with anger. "They've lost their natural fear of humans. It's only a matter of time before someone gets killed." A chorus of agreement followed his statement. Ranchers worried about their livestock. Parents feared for their children's safety. Hunters saw an opportunity to eliminate what they'd always considered a nuisance species. "We don't even know if these are the same wolves that have been spotted near the village," Thomas Parker countered, standing to address the crowd. "And if they are, Liam's involvement suggests they've been socialized to human presence. They've had countless opportunities to harm him, yet they haven't. Would you bet your life on that, teacher? Robert sneered. Or better yet, would you bet your students' lives? What happens when one of those beasts follows Liam to school? The argument continued for hours, growing increasingly heated. Martha and Liam sat silently in the back row, the elderly woman's arm protectively around her grandson's shoulders. Liam stared straight ahead, his young face revealing nothing of his thoughts, though his knuckles whitened as he clenched his hands in his lap. He had to find a way to keep the wolves safe. The meeting ended with the village divided into two clear factions. 1. The larger group led by Robert Miller, demanded immediate action against the wolves. A smaller contingent, primarily younger residents and those influenced by Thomas Parker, advocated for a more measured approach, perhaps relocating the wolves to a more remote area rather than killing them. Sheriff Wilson, caught between competing demands, promised only to investigate further before making any decisions. As the meeting dispersed, Martha hurried Liam through the crowd toward the exit. They had almost reached the door when Robert Miller stepped into their path. "I've hunted wolves for 40 years, he said, his voice low enough that only Martha and Liam could hear. "Never thought I'd see the day when this village protected them over its own people." His gaze shifted to Liam. "Whatever spell you've cast on those animals won't protect them forever, boy. Nature always wins in the end." Martha pulled Liam closer. "He's just a child, Robert. Leave him be." "A child who doesn't understand the danger he's created," he replied, his eyes never leaving Liam's face. "Wolves are killers. It's in their blood, just like it was in the blood of the pack that tore my boy apart 12 years ago." As they pushed past him into the cool night air, Liam finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wolves would never hurt anyone, unless they were threatened first." Martha hustled her grandson home, acutely aware of the hostile stares following them through the darkness. In their rush, she did not realize that Liam no longer held his lapt. It was no longer in his pockets, as though whatever protection it afforded was gone. She knew something bad was coming. As Martha locked the doors and windows, Liam slipped out of the house, heading towards the forest. He had to warn the wolves, tell them to run, to hide. He knew that Robert Miller wouldn't wait for the sheriff's investigation. He would come for them, and Liam had to protect his family. But as he walked towards the woods, he did not see a figure following, a person whose hand reached down to pick up a metal compass, and whisper, "Now, the treasure is yours. I'll keep going with the rest of the chapters as soon as you confirm you'd like me to." Liam plunged into the forest, the moon a sliver hidden behind racing clouds, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around him like mocking specters. His heart pounded in his chest, fear and determination warring within him. He had to reach the wolves, warn them, before it was too late. He had no plan, no weapon, only the desperate hope that he could somehow protect his family. He pushed through the undergrowth, his breath catching in his throat as he stumbled over roots and fallen branches. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth usually soothed him, but tonight it carried a menacing undertone, a whisper of danger. He could hear the distant howls of the wolves, a mournful chorus that seemed to echo his own despair. As he neared the abandoned cabin, he saw it. A flicker of light, a wisp of smoke rising into the night sky. Robert Miller. Liam's blood ran cold. He knew that he was too late, that the hunt had already begun. He had to find a way to stop him, to save his wolves. Creeping closer, Liam saw Robert Miller standing in front of the cabin, surrounded by a group of armed men. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline. The wolves were nowhere to be seen. Robert Miller raised a torch, his face grim. "This is for my son," he said, his voice filled with a chilling resolve. "This is for all the lives those beasts have taken." Liam couldn't let him do it. He had to act, even if it meant risking his own life. He ran towards the cabin, shouting at the top of his lungs. "No. Stop. They haven't done anything." Robert Miller turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Liam. "Get out of here, boy. This isn't your concern. They're my family." Liam cried, his voice cracking with emotion. "You can't hurt them." Robert Miller hesitated, his face softening for a moment. He saw in Liam's eyes the same pain, the same desperation that he had felt when he lost his son. But the hatred, the years of grief, were too deeply ingrained. He shook his head. "They're wolves, Liam. Killers. You can't trust them." He raised the torch again, ready to set the cabin ablaze. But before he could, a figure emerged from the shadows. Thomas Parker stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Robert, stop this," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "This isn't the way. There has to be another way." Robert Miller scoffed. "Another way? They killed my son, Thomas. What other way is there?" "I know you're hurting, Robert," Thomas said, his voice filled with compassion. "But killing these animals won't bring him back. It will only create more pain, more hatred." "You don't understand," Robert Miller said, his voice breaking. "You haven't lost a child." "Maybe not," Thomas replied, "but I understand the power of forgiveness. I understand the need to find a better path." He stepped closer to Robert, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Don't let hate consume you, Robert. Don't let it destroy you." Robert Miller stared at Thomas, his face a mask of grief and anger. For a long moment, it seemed as if he might listen, as if the words of his friend might reach through the years of pain. But then, a blood-curdling howl ripped through the air, shattering the silence and shattering the fragile peace that had begun to form. From the darkness, a pack of wolves emerged, their eyes glowing in the firelight. Luna, Storm, and Scout, their teeth bared, ready to defend their home and their human. Robert Miller's face twisted with rage. "See? I told you. They're killers." He raised the torch, his eyes fixated on the wolves. But before he could strike, Liam stepped forward, placing himself between Robert Miller and the wolves. "No. You won't hurt them." In that moment, as Liam stood defiantly in front of the wolves, a shot rang out, fired not from Robert Miller's gun, but from one of the men beside him. Liam cried out and collapsed to the ground. The lapt his father carried now slipped from Robert Miller's hand, as they realized the treasure could be lost. Chaos erupted. Thomas Parker and Robert Miller stared in disbelief at Liam's prone form, the realization of what had happened crashing down upon them. The wolves, enraged, lunged at the men, their snarls echoing through the forest. Thomas, remembering the words from the lapt, "The compass points to safety," realized that something was wrong. In the confusion, the gunman slipped away, disappearing into the darkness. Robert Miller, his face etched with horror, rushed to Liam's side. "Liam! Liam, can you hear me?" Thomas called his name as well, and he recognized him. The uncle that was supposed to be protecting him has actually tried to harm him. He was so wrong about Thomas, he has been protecting him this whole time, and he didn't even realize it. He was lost to the hurt and to his family. He cradled the boy's head in his arms, his hands stained with blood. Liam groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Robert," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm here, Liam," Robert said, his voice filled with remorse. "I'm here." "The wolves, are they safe?" Liam asked, his eyes searching Robert's face. Robert Miller looked towards the wolves, who were now circling protectively around them. He saw in their eyes not the mindless killing machines he had always believed them to be, but something else entirely: loyalty, compassion, a fierce love for the boy who had become their family. "They're safe, Liam," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, they're safe." Liam closed his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. He clutched the compass that lay beside him, its needle spinning wildly. The lap pointed towards what was most important. As Sheriff Wilson arrived on the scene, sirens wailing in the distance, Robert Miller made a decision. He would no longer be consumed by hatred, by the ghosts of the past. He would dedicate his life to protecting Liam, to protecting the wolves, to creating a future where humans and nature could coexist in peace. The dawn broke over Pinewood Valley, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson. As the first rays of sunlight touched Liam's face, a new chapter began. The path forward would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. Hope for Liam, hope for the wolves, and hope for Pinewood Valley. The compass on the ground had stopped spinning and pointed towards the horizon, showing Thomas where he should be. Thomas knew that he had to save Liam, and protect him from the people that wanted to hurt him. He would always believe in him, no matter the cost. His choice was made. He would protect the boy, even if it cost him everything. The world would never be the same for either man. Years passed. Liam Thompson, once the ostracized wolf boy, became a beacon of hope for Pinewood Valley. The bullet had missed any vital organs, but the event marked a turning point. Thomas Parker, burdened by guilt, confessed to his actions and, with the support of Sheriff Wilson, brought the gunman, a disgruntled member of the Miller family, to justice. Thomas helped to set the world right, and protect the child. Robert Miller, humbled by his near-fatal mistake and Liam's unwavering compassion, publicly renounced his hatred of wolves. He worked tirelessly alongside Thomas to establish the Pinewood Valley Wildlife Sanctuary, a haven for wolves and other wildlife, transforming the town's identity from one of relentless hunting to one of conservation and respect for nature. Martha, finally free from the burden of her long-held secrets, revealed the truth about Liam's father's will, ensuring that his legacy would be used to protect the very animals he had loved. Thomas promised that he would protect the lapped, and keep the compass pointed towards the truth. Liam, guided by Thomas's mentorship and inspired by the wolves, dedicated his life to studying wildlife biology. He returned to Pinewood Valley after graduating, becoming the sanctuary's lead researcher and educator, sharing his unique understanding of wolves and promoting peaceful coexistence between humans and nature. Shadow, though permanently scarred, lived a long and fulfilling life within the sanctuary, fathering many litters and becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. Luna took on the mantle of pack leader after Shadow's passing, guiding the pack with wisdom and strength. The compass that Liam's father had carried, now carefully restored, held a place of honor in Liam's cabin. Its needle, once spinning aimlessly, now pointed towards the sanctuary, a constant reminder of the path he had chosen, a path forged in compassion, courage, and the unwavering bond between a boy and his wolves. Pinewood Valley, once a town defined by fear and hatred, had been reborn. The statue of Jedediah Pinewood in the town square was replaced with a new one, depicting Liam and Shadow, side by side, a symbol of the valley's transformation. The story of the Wolf Boy, the secret in the woods, and the compass to guide the way became a legend, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations. It was a story of how love could conquer hatred, how courage could overcome fear, and how even the wildest of creatures could find a place in the human heart. As they began to believe in the whispers of the compass, everything changed.